Puffy clouds floated lazily across the sky. The day is sunny, hot. A light breeze blows pleasant freshness on my sweaty face. I dismounted, handed the horse to the orderly, approached the staff carriage. Overhanging his legs, Captain Presnyakov, who replaced Captain Oremenko, who'd gone to the hospital, looks at the narrow strips of bread along the dirt rad. Green spring wheat, millet, corn, reddish B-B-N-O. From time to time he utters meaningful. Yes. What happened, Igor Tarasovich? Presnyakov, spitting out a blade of grass clamped in his lips, jumped off the wagon and walked beside it. It's chaotic. We've gotten used to it somehow. Our collective farm field is like your sea. It goes beyond the horizon. And here we have patches like on a clown's pants. The single farms were here as they were, and still are, except that the Hitlerites have seized the best plots. Have you seen the wedge of wheat by the river we passed recently? They say it's the township commandant's. Yes, I've seen it. It's about 15 hectares. No less. The fascists have made a mess of it. The new order cost the Poles a sea of tears and blood. The Poles welcomed the soldiers of the Soviet army. We ourselves felt the warmth and cordiality of Poles, and the inhabitants of the first Polish village on our way, Oreń-Me, met us on the outskirts of the village. Old men and men, with a sedate and friendly manner, women with joyful smiles, and the ubiquitous village boys, with delighted exclamation. Villagers offered milk and water. Girls presented the soldiers with flowers. I remember that an elderly Pole looked at the column of heavy tanks for a long time, and finally he couldn't stand it and turned to me. Mr. Captain, we were told that the Soviets have nothing left but rifles, Koskas and axes. Yesterday, all day long, I watched how your airplanes beat the fascists, and now, on tanks, artillery, and what good horses you have. What can a Boche do against such a force? The Polish peasant was right. Nowadays it's difficult, almost impossible to resist the power of our army. Your conversation with Presnyakov continues. Igor Tarasovich doesn't give up the thought of infertility. Soon, Alexander Terentievich, a new life will take shape in these places. Igor Tarasovich, the Polish people are moving towards it. Lieutenant Yeligin joins us. The lieutenant is leaning on a stick. Yesterday he bruised his leg during the crossing. Ivan Ivanovich flatly refuses the offer to sit in the wagon. How can I sit when others are walking? No, I can't. I'll go with the others. What are we talking about? We are exchanging thoughts about the post-war organization of the Poles, explains Presnyakov. Reasonably, I've thought about it many times too. Ivan Ivanovich goes silent for a while, as if gathering his thoughts, then continue. Undoubtedly, much will depend on us, the representatives of the country of Soviets. Yes, I did not misspoke. It is we, the soldiers, who represent our socialist state in the eyes of the Polish population. By us, from our appearance to our behavior and actions, they judge Soviet people. Yeligin corrected his russet hair, which was dislodged from under his cap, and smiled. Yes, you understand the situation yourself, but I think it's necessary to remind you that someone owes me a debt. You're so cunning, Commissioner. Presnyakov twisted his head. There was no time to gather the sergeants. And how much can we talk about the same thing? The meeting was held, the Politinformatia too. That's good. But still, talk to the junior commanders, Igor Tarasovich, and the commander should talk to the officers. That's a pebble in my garden. I know, Ivan Ivanovich. I'll gather at the halt. But word by word, the conversation turned to our worries. Continuing to discuss business, we did not notice how the company columns went off to the side of the road, and the roadway was occupied by vehicles of the Katyusha division. Close behind them were tractors with artillery pieces. We were overtaken by an army fighter anti-tank regiment. 3 kilometers to the left, dust from under the hooves of horses of the cavalry column was blowing. To the right and a few ahead, we could determine from the outlines of vehicles loaded with pontoons that sappers were moving out. And so to the horizon, infantry, artillery, cavalry, tanks, the corps and army units and formations, under the reliable protection of Red Star fighters hovering in the air, continued to move on Polish soil. Look, comrades. Having taken a look at the surroundings, Yeligin couldn't stand it. The strength. How can the fascist resist us? Time was precious. The command sought not to give the enemy a chance to get a grip on the favorable lines. By the end of July 24, The enemy went to the defense on the left bank of the Vipch River. According to the order of the Corps headquarters, the division made a forced march and concentrated near a small Polish town, Krasny Stava, turned by Hitlerites into a defense junction. The 828th Rifle Regiment was tasked to seize the railroad station, and the 862nd, the city. Our regiment was still in reserve. Preparation for the offensive began. The battalions formed assault groups, artillery and mortars took positions. Reconnaissance work was carried out and we were involved in it. Before going to the front line, Major Pavyuk oriented us, battalion commander. The regiment is scheduled to be put into action at the capture of the central part of Krasny Stav. In the offensive strip of Major Kozivnikov, interrogated the commander of the 1st Battalion, Major Guskov. Yes, however, it is not excluded the possibility of using us elsewhere. Be careful, everywhere memorize the terrain. With the onset of hostilities will be little time to organize the fight. Meanwhile, dusk had fallen. The July evening brought a short rest. Short because at about 22 hours the regiment on the alert began to move to the starting line. In order to strengthen the strike division commander narrowed the front of the offensive 862nd Rifle Regiment Major Kozevnikov. The vacated area was filled by the 1st and 3rd Battalions. At 11:30 in the evening began to talk artillery. Howitzers howled, batteries of 76. guns fired, regimental mortars struck deafeningly. In response, the fascists were worried. Their front line was illuminated by garlands of rockets, bursts of fire at the positions of artillery and mortars. Half an hour later the attack began. The first to move forward were the assault groups. Rifle companies rushed after them. Direct fire guns hit the targets identified during the artillery preparation, and in the first minutes of the attacks the fire of the artillerymen was accurate, and the enemy machine guns were silenced. This allowed our units to break into the first trench without much loss and take possession of it. It was necessary not to let the Hitlerites come to their senses. I gave the command to speed up the movement. But company commanders did not want to break away from the enemy, seen by the flashes of shots. It was easy to understand that the assault groups and rifle chains, having passed the first enemy trench, were moving forward. A similar picture was observed on the right and left. The neighbours were not lagging behind. The Germans tried to delay us in the 3rd trench. It even came to hand-to-hand combat, but the enemy's nerves could not stand it, and he retreated. The fascists failed to get a grip on the outermost houses of Krasny Stav. Rifle companies, having blocked part of the forces of the enemy in the houses, together with assault groups, continued to drive the Germans out of the city streets. At midnight, Krasny Stav was completely liberated. This was facilitated by the fact that the artillerymen reliably suppressed the targets, destroyed observation posts, and disrupted communications. Undoubtedly, the skill of our commanders and fighters to conduct combat operations in conditions of limited visibility also had an impact. During the fulfillment of the task, we made detours and covered objects, which the fascists were extremely afraid of. When our small group appeared in the rear of the enemy or cut deep into the flank, Hitlerites began to withdraw. From cellars, barns, shelters began to appear people. Residents soon filled the sidewalks, the roadways of the streets. They hugged, kissed our soldiers and officers. At one of the crossroads I met tables covered with white tablecloths with bread, fresh cucumbers, green onions, other unpretentious food, and jugs of wine. 2 elderly Poles and a woman in her 50s, in embroidered national costumes, were persistently beckoning soldiers, sergeants and officers passing by to taste the treats. In broken Russian language, our Katyusha was heard in one place or another. The city did not slail. The city rejoiced. The city celebrated its liberation. After Krasny Stav received the order to pursue the enemy, the regiment marched in the left column of the division. The battalion was allocated to the forward detachment. The Nazis were rolling back to the Vistula, not only in our strip but also in front of the offensive front of neighbouring divisions. During these days, newspapers and radio brought glad tidings. On July 27, the front troops liberated Lvov, Peremysl and reached the San River. The command demanded not to break away from the enemy, to hang on his shoulders, to impose their will on him. Our task is to get to the Vistula and force it, repeatedly repeated Major Pavlik. The Supreme Command headquarters made a decision, according to which the troops of the 1st Belarusian and our 1st Ukrainian fronts were to force the Vistula from Warsaw to the mouth of the Vistula River in order to seize bridgeheads for the subsequent offensive to the borders of Nazi Germany. Armin troops were given the task to force the Vistula and capture a bridgehead near Sandomir. We carried it out, hurrying to get to the river. As we approached the Vistula, the task was clarified. In the evening of July 28, the regiment was ordered to reach the river by the end of the next day and immediately begin forcing it. At the halt, I was caught up with the assistant to the Chief of Staff of the regiment on reconnaissance, Senior Lieutenant Borodula. Comrade Captain, the regiment commander ordered to accelerate the pace of the march, said Georgy Nikolaevich. The route is the same. When approaching the river, immediately begin to prepare the forcing and capture the bridgehead on the left bank. The battalion broke away from its neighbours and now moved in a large forest area. On the flanks on the right and left in our rear, the rumble of battle could be heard from time to time. At dawn on July 29, the commander of the head marching outpost, Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Chuganov, reported. I came to a fork in the road 2 kilometers from the place Josepho. The reconnaissance group report. No Germans in the village. I continue to fulfill the task. I pulled a map out of my field bag. Presnyakov with a flashlight beam highlighted on it, an unusual name for the Russian language. Next to it was a winding line, a rim. What shall we do, Igor Tarasovich? It's getting light. Yes, it's getting light. Be damned. I don't want to make a fuss prematurely. That's what I mean. Should we pull the main forces out of here? We were in the woods, the crowns of trees, reliably camouflaged equipment and men. Alexander Terentьevich, I don't think we should move further than the edge of the forest. Chugunov and his men will take refuge in Josepho. He'll send a patrol to the Vistula bank. Let him survey the area properly and report back. Then we'll decide what to do. I think that's right. No, I agreed. We need to warn Chugunov to stay with the main forces in Josepho until the situation is clarified. No, send a contact. We made our way to the forest edge. Dawn was coming more and more into its own. Birds were crowing in the dense hazel trees, and from the direction of a small Polish village we could hear the crowing of roosters. Look at you, smiled the orderly. Just like in the good old days, the houses are shouting. An old man, Yeligin, turned to him. How old are you? No, 20th year. That's just for the record, Comrade Lieutenant. I remembered the village. Our roosters are very vocal. You can hear them at dawn. The forest smelled of smoke, light, fresh from dry logs. So our farm workers are turning around? Yes, Comrade Captain. He came out from behind my back, Petty Officer Gorobets. We are preparing breakfast. What are you going to eat today, Fedos? Asked Petty Officer Yeligin. Chiano. Potatoes, Comrade Lieutenant. Fresh. I've had enough of cereal. Where did the potatoes come from? Ivan Ivanovich became wary. We were passing through a farm. I asked a local resident. He allowed me to dig them up. He said it was the garden of a runaway headman. Oh, look at me, Fedos. Do you know the order? My honest Komsomol word, Comrade Lieutenant. Ivan Ivanovich, Presnyakov interceded for the petty officer. I witnessed the conversation with the Pole. He's not lying. At that time, the soldiers in camouflage coats appeared in the clearing. Oh, the scouts have arrived, said someone from the headquarters entourage. Luklikin himself. The commander stopped the group and, typing a step, came up to me. I recognized Petty Officer Blokin. Comrade Captain, Petty Officer Blokin with a group of fighters arrived at your disposal. Hello, Pyotr Yakovlevich. I extended my hand to the commander of the platoon of regimental scouts. Blokin grew up in the regiment. Scout, senior scout, squad leader, deputy commander of the reconnaissance platoon and commander. By my arrival in the regiment, on his shoulders were Petty Officer epaulets. Soon the battles began, and with them new sorties behind enemy lines added new awards to the petty officer, including the Order of the Red Star. However, despite the glory, Blokin remained a simple and modest man. And now it was a pleasure to look at the petty officer, slim, trim, with an automatic rifle slung over his back, with a knife in a neat sheath on his belt. Sit down, Pyotr Yakovlevich. The Chief of Staff has already asked about you. He says, Where have you put my scouts? I replied, Not a needle in the hay they'll be found. So Major Modin is worried? We sat down on a fallen tree. Blokin took off his cap and neatly tucked it under his wide army belt, threw back the whirl of unruly hair that had fallen on his forehead, looked at me. I asked, "Do you know what it took?" "In general terms," Eeg answered the petty officer. "Then listen." I turned to the adjutant of the senior battalion who was nearby. "The map, Igor Tarasovich." Captain Presnyakov handed me the map. "Look, Pyotr Yakovlevich, behind the Vistula, a flat area further. An old channel after a gentle bank rise, a small field and the farm Lesnikalupi. We need to find out if there is an enemy between the Vistula and the channel, and also further on." "Mina, do you mean, comrade captain, including Lesnikalupi?" Blokhin clarified. "Yes. Now on the shore is a scout from Shugunov. Any minute now the first data from him should arrive. If there is nothing suspicious, we should carefully from the shore to conduct reconnaissance by observation. It's important not to spook the Krauts before the forcing begins. Do you understand me?" "Yes, I understand." It took a few minutes to clarify the route of the advance. Blokhin was about to get up, but I held him back. "Don't hurry, petty officer. Let's wait for the first message from the scouting party. A minute earlier, a minute later, it doesn't matter much now. See, the sun is rising. German planes are coming. They can spot even a small group of men on the approach to the Vistula. And the opposite bank of the river is occupied by the enemy. The Nazis are not so simple-minded as not to get a grip on the water frontier. It's important for us to seize the bridgehead, and to do it unexpectedly for the Germans. And the surprise lies in the secrecy of our actions." The commander of the supply platoon came up to us and invited us to breakfast. "Come on, Pyotr Yakovlevich, let's have a snack. All the more you need a refreshment for the road. Call your eagles." Under a big tree on a neatly laid-out cloak tent, there were kettles with oiled potatoes. Nearby were green onions and some fresh cucumbers. The scout's eyes glistened. We sat and ate the potatoes with pleasure. At that time I did not know, as well as Blokier himself, that he was no longer a petty officer, that on that day he was promoted to the rank of junior lieutenant, and that for the throw across the Vistula he would be awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Nor did the scout Alexei Tyoga, who was squatting near me, know that he would receive the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Other scouts will be honored with high awards. And now in front of me sat people who were to you, and not for the first time, to pave the way for rifle companies, battalions, regiments. A message from Shugunov had arrived. Reconnaissance reported, behind the old river enemy trench on the right flank about 4 kilometers away, on a pontoon bridge crossed the Vistula crossing the retreating enemy units, over the place of crossing Hang fascist plain. Well, something has been clarified. Now your task, Pyotr Yakovlevich, together with Chugunov's patrol, is to observe Lesnikalupi and below. Put everything you notice on the chart. I'll be with you in an hour and a half. She has understood, comrade captain. The petty officer nodded to the scouts. We've stayed, guys, and that's enough. Thank you for the bread and salt, as they say in Kalininshina. It's time to get down to business. Blokhin and his group left. We began to prepare for crossing the Vistula. There were no means of crossing, so we had to rely on whatever was at hand. With Captain Presnyakov and Lieutenant Yelegin, we thought over the way to the river and the capture of the bridgehead. There were a lot of unsolvable questions. Wherever you throw, everywhere wedge, scratched the back of his head adjutant senior battalion. What do you mean, Igor Tarasovich? So the water surface of the river is, in fact, 500 meters, and we even have a dinghy EE, and there's not a single one, comrade captain. We heard the voice of the battalion commander, Lieutenant Malygin. We looked back. Vasily Fedorovich stood 3 steps away from us. Next to him, 2 men in civilian clothes and Petty Officer Petrov. There are boats. Lieutenant Malygin nodded toward the strangers. Here local Polish comrades offered to point out where to take them. We stood up, shook hands with the Poles. "Mr. Captain," spoke an elderly Pole in broken Russian, "there are boats." "Nabria, so give them to us." The peasants hurriedly talked among themselves, waving their hands in response to our incomprehensible glances. At last, the older one turned to me again. "So best as I can tell you, they are at the bottom of the river. We hid them from the Nazis." How many boats are there?" Presnyakov asked. "This one has 7. He threw a glance in the direction of the elderly peasant Malygin. "And he has 2. The young Pole nodded in agreement. "Well, that's another matter," I involuntarily burst out. We gave the peasant some cigarettes. We began to ask about the Germans. Poles understood our questions with difficulty. Malygin came to our aid. The parter of the battalion, together with Chuganov's company, visited Josepho, had time to understand the situation. The fascists left the village yesterday morning. The locals knew nothing more about them. Time was precious. Lieutenant Malygin and a group of fighters went to the Vistula bank with their Polish comrades. They had to find and raise the boats. So there is a beginning. Lieutenant Yelagin rubbed his hands together. What do you think, Alexander Terentievich? And not bad, Ivan Ivanovich. Now we need to decide on the place and time of forcing. About the place, said Captain Presnyakov. I think it would be better to decide directly on the shore. That's right, Igor Tarasovich, I agreed. And the time, I suggest night. It is clear that not in the daytime. As a matter of course, said Yelagin. On the forest road we heard the clatter of hooves. The regimental commander and his deputy in the political department were approaching us. They were accompanied by machine gunners. Major Pavyuk, without getting off the copse, nodded to me. Well, you have climbed. Altunen. We could hardly find you, thanks to your contact. The regimental commanders rushed out. Spit it out, combat. What are you thinking here? Asked Pavyuk without any offences. He began to report considerations. Valentin Yevstafevich and Nikolai Afanasyevich listened attentively. They liked the decision. Will there be enough forces? Wouldn't it happen that you would seize the bridgehead and the German would throw you out of it? There is a risk, Comrade Major, but it is justified. We have surprise on our side. We'll get a grip on the western shore. It's unlikely that the fascists will be able to throw us off unless they reach the water by corpses, but I don't think we'll let that happen. And who doesn't take risks in war, of course, reasonably? Pavyuk smiled. Do you remember Ozdutichi? Didn't I tell you, Nikolai Afanasyevich? He turned to Kuliabin. How Combat Altunen led the company in the attack, put his head under the bullets. No. True, Lieutenant Yelagin reported that the commander personally raised the men in the attack. What happened then was this. Senior Lieutenant Kovalev's company was half-enveloped. The soldiers lay down under crossed rifle and machine gun fire. The platoon suffered casualties to move back, not to fulfill the order, and to expose themselves to fascist bullets. To go forward, apparently, also did not have the guts. That's the way a man is built. If he went up to the attack, he would go on. If he lay down, it takes a lot of courage to get up, especially the first one. Death in the war is near almost all the time, but everyone wants to survive, so you try not to think about it. Though somewhere subconsciously a chill of fear lives in you, from time to time it makes itself known, especially when the enemy's fire does not allow you to raise your head. You lie on the ground, you know that it is necessary to get up, but you cling to it and wait for something. You need a push, an inner force, but where to get it at this moment? I sent Lieutenant Malygin to the company. No sooner had he disappeared than I got a call. Major Modin, Chief of Staff, is interested in the advancement. Just reported the situation. I hear the voice of the division commander in the phone. And how long do you think, Captain, to lie down? Should I raise your men to the attack myself? No, I'd rather do it, Comrade Colonel. I say back to him. You should be in charge of the division. That's it, I see then. Understand, Garden Head, the outcome of the battle for Ozdutichi depends on you? I heard the telephone receiver at the opposite end slam down on the lever. I was so annoyed that I had no strength to restrain myself. I grabbed the machine gun. Where to, Alexander Terentevich? Captain Okremenko was the only one who managed to exclaim. Where to? Zakudak-Alalaya. I'm going to Kovalev. Tell the mortar men to cover and throw machine gun platoons to the company's flanks. We'll break through. I ran out of the post and straight into the company. We're in full height, we're ducking, and we're even in a crawl. About 30 minutes later was in place, and immediately felt how dense the fire of German machine guns. It's still nothing, Musold Kovalev, silent machine gunners. Otherwise hear and cannot lift your head. Where is Lieutenant Malygin? Communists gathered. He answers the company commander and points to the right. Over there, in that crater from under the airplane bomb, instructs. Now we'll go into the attack. Now I'll lead the men before it was necessary. Kovalev lowered his eyes, exhaled heavily. Tried. It did not work. Fire would be artillery sprinkle. Where will you get it? You've got 2 40-50 guns. The third one was broken in the morning. The regimental battery is far away, but the mortars will help. and the machine guns will hit the flanks. Thou the men. At the signal of green rocket mortars and machine gunners will open fire. Red rocket, attack. I don't remember all the details of the battle, but it is well remembered that after the cry attack, forward, everyone stood up amicably. We stood up and ran. They ran, fell and ran again. I caught my pant leg on something. I didn't hear the crack of cuts. The company took the trench, and the enemy rolled back into a hollow overgrown with bushes and tall grass. Heated by the battle, we watched how the soldiers fished out the Hitlerites hiding in trenches and crevices. I heard Pavliuk's voice from behind. Who ordered you to lead the men into the attack yourself, may I ask? You are the battalion commander, the organizer of the battle. Valentin Evstafievich reprimanded me for about 5 minutes, and finally warned me. I forgive you for the first time, but if anything like this happens again, blame yourself. I need not a corpse, but a living combatant. Yes, I understand. That's right. And now the regimental commander reminded about this case and humorously described to Nikolai Afanasyevich my unsightly appearance in those minutes, remembering the hole on my pants and adding something for colour from myself. Did the lesson go well? Kolyabin asked me. Of course, Comrade Major, it did. Then, Valentin Evstafievich, perhaps we can inform Captain Oltunin of the purpose of our arrival. Of course you can. Major Pavliuk unzipped his field bag, took out a sealed envelope, handed it to him. Here is the preliminary combat order for forcing and occupation of the bridgehead. Familiarize yourself with it. We'll decide the rest on the spot. While I was studying the document, Major Kolyabin was talking to Lieutenant Yelagin, who came up. Nikolai Afanasyevich was interested in activities with personnel to ensure the fulfillment of the combat mission, handed the Deputy Chief of Staff neatly rolled up a bundle of fresh newspaper. By the way, you received leaflets with descriptions of feats. Heroes of the Soviet Union Sergeant Chegladze and Private Talalushkin. The division's political department timed their release to coincide with the forcing of the Vistula. Chegladze is from our regiment. I know, Comrade Major, that he's from our regiment. Yesterday, at the political informational session, I mentioned him, but the mail hasn't come to us yet. Strange, shrugged his shoulders, the deputy commander of the regiment on the political part. All right, I've brought 24 leaflets with me. Distribute them to the agitators. Kolyabin handed Ivan Ivanovich another small package. Yes, familiarized with the preliminary combat order, Tunin, asked the regimental commander. Yes, I have familiarized myself with it. I approve your plan. I give the battalion an artillery division, fighter anti-tank batteries, sapper platoon. They're on their way. I think they'll be here by evening, so you will be provided with artillery. Major Pavliuk smoked a cigarette, waited until Kolyabin and Yelagin finished talking. Well, let's go to the bank of the Vistula. Let's see, so to speak, with our own eyes what and how. I understood the impatience of the regiment commander. Valentin Evstafievich tended to get to everything himself, and in this situation all the more. We were facing a very difficult task, and we couldn't afford to fail. I'm ready. Good. Let's go. Pavliuk turned to Kolyabin. Nikolai Afanasyevich, Oltunin and I are going to the bank of the Vistula. All right. Be careful. Take the gunners with you. We went out in a small group. Me, the regiment commander, and 3 machine gunners. At first we walked up, then ducked down. The last 100 meters moved by a narrow, shallow scour and small bushes. Not reaching 150 meters to the river, we cautiously got out on the crest of the dam, and a wonderful panorama opened to us. Washing the lush coastal greenery, the Vistula flowed calmly and majestically. The water sparkled and shimmered in the sunlight. Dark at depth, closer to the shore it turned blue and turquoise. The shrubbery, which densely overgrew the opposite shore, interlocked with the floodplain. Further on, there was an old river with reed-covered banks. Then there was a meadow again, ending with a wall of a steeply going upward cliff. On top of it, stretched deep into the depths of the yellow bread field. Most of the bread was already compressed, tied into sheaves and laid out, but not in long one-to-one sheaves, as we have in Russia, but in short crosses. They looked like the roofs of little huts on chicken legs from children's fairy tales. Adjoining the field were the tidy houses of the forest huts with a pointed picket in the middle. Behind them, across a small field, the tiled roofs of the Sishitsa colony dipped in gardens to its right, along the ornate partings of the roads. The yards of Gurno loomed in the gilding of the sunlight. Far away, on the very horizon, the outlines of forested hills shivered in the hot air and blurred. To the left upstream, beyond the Vistula, the village of Dorotka could be seen. It was hot and quiet, and I didn't want to believe in the ghostliness, deceptiveness of the calmness, which smelled from the pictures spread before us. Almost immediately behind the old river, the trench zigzagged. From here, the Hitlerites' leading edge began. Above the cliff in the depths between yellowing sheaves were scattered individual trenches. The outlines of another trench snaked at the very edge of Lesnai Kalup. Yes, I sighed involuntarily. The enemy has a trump card in his hands. Not only on the river, but also on the western bank we will be in the palm of his hand. Not quite so. Alexander Terentievich, the Pavyuk objected, looking through binoculars at the terrain. The map may be a trump card, but the move is ours. Suddenness means a lot. We will impose our will on the enemy, not on him. Valentin Evstafievich waited for a pause and continued. We have more pluses. In fact, the space between the river and its old river is a large island, that is, a place that requires forcing twice. And besides the precipice, I think that the Germans are least expecting us here, and their defences are probably weaker here. Do you take that into account? Besides, look, there's some good bushes along that bank. You can hide more than one battalion in it. The grass rustled nearby. Petty Officer Pyotr Blokin appeared from under the ground. What will please you, Scout? Pavlik asked him. Nothing much so far. There are no signs of life in the first trench. At the very Lesny Kalupa observed the Croat, walking not camouflaged. They don't know what they're doing. I've thought about it this way and that. We again began to look at the river and the western bank by the established habit from right to left, from ourselves to the depth, planning step by step the fulfillment of the task. What is there, Petty Officer, that is not clear? After a long pause, the regimental commander concluded. The Germans are not waiting for us. According to their calculations, the Russians are still far away, so they are behaving freely for the time being. But you too much do not loom here. It won't take long to spook the enemy. It's not favourable for us. Having estimated the place of forcing, I laid out my final decision to the regiment Kamar. First across the Vistula, I'll move a group of scouts, followed by rifle and machine gun companies, Peterovsky Battalion Headquarters, and then mortars and artillery. Here we clarified the issues of interaction, outlined the use of attached but not yet arrived artillery division and fighter anti-tank batteries. I was concerned that during the reconnaissance, no matter how much I looked into that bank, did not see signs of the immediate presence of the Germans in the first trench and trenches. Isn't there some kind of trick here? The thought flashed across my mind. Or are the Germans so sure that the enemy will not cross the river in this place? I shared my doubts with the regiment commander. Valentin Evstafievich shared my anxiety. Yes, that this section of the river bank the Germans left without cover is out of the question. As if in response to the words of the regiment commander heard the voice of Petty Officer Bloke. Look at the very village openly go. What impertinent people. The regiment commander and I almost simultaneously raised binoculars to our eyes. Not far from Lesny Kalupa, there was up to a squad of soldiers, gesticulating vigorously. The Germans were obviously discussing something. No, they are not waiting for us, Major Pavlik finally confirmed in his conclusion. Otherwise they wouldn't be walking around like that. Well, by all indications it is so, Comrade Major. That's where we'll take them. The main thing, Pavyuk drew my attention, is not to give yourself away for the time being. The success of the regiment division, and if you want to know, of the corps as a whole depends on whether you can force the Vistula tonight without the enemy noticing. But don't be so hot-headed. Your decision to send a small group to the other bank first with the task to ensure the landing of the main forces of the battalion is correct. There's less chance that the enemy will be able to detect the beginning of the forcing. For the landing, we chose a place, a small bay entering the coastal Talnik. From it there was a path along the shore. It was clearly visible through binoculars. Perhaps it was used by peasants going down to the river, and most likely it was laid by enemy soldiers. The enemy had prepared the defence in advance, as evidenced by the overgrown grass broomstones of trenches and trenches. Major Pavliuk during the reconnaissance delved into the smallest details of the upcoming task. The Vistula was to be crossed virtually from the start, and so far only our battalion, and even then without one company. Other units attached and supporting units were on the march. We returned from reconnaissance in the afternoon. Regimental commander, before sitting in the saddle, shook my hand. See you tonight, combat. I'm going to drive the others. Get ready here. Collier Bin stays with you. Till Paychuk disappeared behind the trees. I waited for a while, then turned to the clearing. The well-tended forest surrounded me on both sides. I smelled resin and something else, distant deer. My heart ached. I remembered the tall pine trees, stretching along the wide hollows into the vast distance. The stupefying odors of the Siberian land in the summer season. Nature generously endowed my native places with grasses, colours of landscapes. In late spring, the hills and edges of groves are dressed in bright red, in early summer in sky purple, and closer to autumn the red colour triumphs again. Here the forest is slender, the grass is also tall, but there is not that immensity, primordiality, which captivate and disturb the soul in our country and keep us awake at night. I wish I were home now came to my mind a stray thought to look at our natural surroundings. A momentary burst of joy soon gave way to the present cares. Many questions still had to be solved, but the main thing was the preparation of the people. Their attitude predetermined the success of the combat task. When I was approaching the location of the battalion, I was called by Lieutenant Yelagin. Alexander Terentievich, the 6th Company has arrived. In the morning I had planned to visit this company and talk to people. I'm coming, Ivan Ivanovich. Where is the 6th Company stationed? Here, Yelagin showed forward with his hand, about 150 meters away. The gunners were stationed in a small clearing in the forest. Recently there had been thick grass growing here. Now it was cut and stacked in a small haystack. The hay had not yet lost its freshness and gave off spicy odours. The tired men were about to take it apart for rest, but they were stopped by Sergeant Zatchoy. The men looked at him, stomped on the spot, sighed and dispersed. I must admit that I was especially happy for the men when, having arrived in the company and heard about this episode, I saw the stack in one piece. Company Commander Chugunov and Battalion Partor, Maligin sat leaning against the trunk of a stumpy oak. At the sight of me stood up. Sit down. What are you talking about? We're discussing, Comrade Captain, applications for admission to the party. 10 people have applied. It's good that people decided to merge their lives with the life of the party before accomplishing such a responsible task. Even very good. How do people feel? I asked Chugunov. Forcing the Vistula are eager. The resolution at the meeting adopted, to beat the enemy in the... So you don't forget Stalingrad? It's impossible to forget such a thing, Comrade Captain. During the formation of our division, the units that had a chance to participate in the great battle on the Volga River joined our division. Despite the fact that people got into different regiments, divisions, battalions and companies, the traditions of Stalingraders continue to live on. This was the case at Bryansk, Uyayaki, on the Dnieper, in many other places. And this, in my opinion, is good, that people remember about Stalingrad by the courage of its defenders equal to today's deeds. Talked with Chugunov on platoons. The soldiers have already rested, put themselves in order. On their faces was not that stamp of fatigue and sullenness which can be seen at the end of a tiring march. Some of them were cleaning weapons, inspecting ammunition. Others, gathered in circles, were talking. We approached one of the groups. A medium-sized, gaunt soldier with a newspaper in his hands was telling his comrade something. Platoon agitator Private Ovsyannikov introduced him to me, company commander. Ovsyannikov, what interesting things do you tell people? Everything is interesting now, Comrade Captain, replied the soldier. Me, the Krauts are dragging away. I read the report of Sovinform Bureau. They got a good beating in Belarusia and our front has moved to the Vistula. I think we'll be going home soon. Before that, we still have to break the Germans. We'll crack them, Comrade Captain. They won't get away from us. We'll cross the Vistula tonight and then we'll go on. It's interesting to see what Germany is like. I liked Ovsyannikov's thoughts. The soldier is sure that the forcing is a matter in general solved and mentally he's already on the left bank. I knew from experience that confidence is half of success, if not, but did the others think so? As we talked, it became clear that the soldiers and sergeants of the platoon live with the capture of the bridgehead. I was pleased that the soldiers are serious about the upcoming task. Do not think that the enemy can be easily defeated. Platoon Commander Senior Lieutenant Serpukin showed me a neat raft made of dried wood. For each department we think to tie one, in case there are not enough boats. I liked the idea, True, we had planned to accompany Chugunov ferry on boats, but the reserve is not superfluous, especially since so far none of us did not know what turn things will take. The enemy by their actions can correct our plans, and then handy watercraft will be enough. The rafts must be prepared. I looked at the officers of the company. I see. We will prepare, answered Senior Lieutenant Chugunov. In the battalion brought the address of the Military Council of the Army. Our motherland, it said, expects from you, guardsmen, new successes in the fighting to liberate the people of Wormwood. We have a task before us, VA to force the Vistula, to overturn the enemy with a swift blow, and to bring closer the hour of victory over fascism. The appeal of the Military Council was read in all units. Officers, sergeants, and soldiers of the battalion expressed in their speeches the unyielding determination to succeed. At about 9 o'clock in the evening, the sky was covered with clouds. It began to rain, and it became easier to breathe. The July sun had been scorching mercilessly for the last few days. The sweltering nights did not bring the expected relief, and now people, longing for coolness, were glad to expose their sweaty faces to the raindrops. More and more night was falling. I hurried to the bank of the Vistula. During the reconnaissance with company and platoon commanders, a final decision was worked out, which determined the order of forcing. Sends the first to go to the west bank of the river, were the scouts with the task of detecting the presence of the enemy directly behind the old river. During the day, the observers failed to determine whether the first trench was occupied by Hitlerites or not. Although the scales were tipping in favor of the fact that there was no enemy there, it was still worthwhile to make sure once again. At the front, we had to see everything. Sometimes in the fulfillment of the task, the enemy makes its own adjustments, and the battle is not quite as you plan it. It is possible that the Germans managed to outsmart us in camouflage. You start forcing, and the enemy will give you a present with all the consequences. With the receipt of a signal from Petty Officer Blokin about the results of reconnaissance, we still had the opportunity to make, if it turned out to be necessary, adjustments to the course of the task. That's why I hurried along the familiar path to Viola. I met Blokin at the water's edge. The rest of the scouts were also there. Nearby, in the coastal bushes, I noticed in the afternoon there was a boat in readiness. We checked the time. There were a few minutes left before the group's departure. Nothing new, Petty Officer? No, Comrade Captain, nothing. We've been keeping watch all the time. Not a single soul in the first trench. True, between the Vistula and the old channel we noticed a fire half an hour ago. It's hard to say who lit it. I sent a liaison to report to you. Hasn't arrived. Not yet. Pyotr Yakovlevich. Apparently we missed each other. We were silent, listening to the evening rustles. I wanted to tell you one more thing. Petty Officer, be careful when approaching the trench. Maybe the Krauts have mined the area. Yes, I've already thought about it, Comrade Captain, and warned the guys. Then, as they say in Russia, Godspeed. It's time. Blokin gave the command. Scouts dragged the boat on their hands to the shore, lowered it into the water, and began to sit down in it. In farewell, he shook the petty officer's hand and wished him success. The water splashed once under the oars. The boat silently moved away from the shore and gradually disappeared in the darkness. While waiting for the first group of the landing party, I sat down on a rock. Nearby settled Ordinaritzia and 2 machine gunners. A branch crunched nearly. Someone was approaching us. Soon we heard the voice of Lieutenant Yeleny. Near they must be. I'm here, Ivan Ivanovich. Zampolit approached, threw a glance around. The scouts are gone? Yes, time. Are the men far away? They're coming. Good. So far, everything's going according to plan. How are the men feeling? Although I knew that the commanders and fighters are eager to do the job, but still did not refuse the question. I wanted to hear confirmation of this from the lips of a comrade whose opinion I valued very much. My combat life had made me so close friends with Ivan Ivanovich that sometimes the judgment and advice of one was simply necessary for the other. Lieutenant Yelyagin, a teacher by profession, a political worker by vocation, knew most soldiers, not to mention sergeants, petty officers and officers by name and patronymic. It is not easy in a combat situation, even in such a military group as a company, and here at a battalion. Almost every day people come out of the line. Arrives replenishment from the marching companies, medical centre, hospitals. Sometimes with the newcomers is no time and a couple of words to exchange, much less to talk on the heart-to-heart. Yelagin knew dozens of people so closely that their lives and destinies became a part of his life. Soldiers and commanders were well aware of this. That's why they treated him with respect, valued his advice, and among themselves called high and honourable word conversation one could often. Commissar said, Commissar advised. Commissar will ask. And although this man was simple in treatment, soft in character, he was feared more than any strict commander. They knew that he would not pass by a mistake. A blunder, he would tell about it directly, without any offences, as well as he would not tolerate injustice, no matter from whom it came. Such is he, Elagian, accessible to all, a man of crystal soul. And also brave. This day in the battalion held a party meeting. The conversation was about the landing. Ivan Ivanovich took the floor, put before the communists tasks for party political support for the implementation of the upcoming battle. And the last thing I want to say, he addressed the audience, I ask you, comrades in the party, entrust me to go with the paratroopers following the scouts. In the first group selected the best fighters of the battalion, and I have a great honour to be with them. In the clearing where the meeting was held, there was silence. The first to break her deputy commander of the regiment on the political part of Major Kulyaby. Well, comrades, I think the candidate is suitable. Nikolai Afanasyevich turned to me. How? Trust, Comrade Altunin? To tell you the truth, in my heart I was against. There were many experienced officers in the battalion. Besides, they were much younger than Elagian. Besides, I didn't want to lose such a deputy. But he turned out to be more cunning than I thought. Knowing in advance that I would not agree with his request to head the group in a normal conversation, he decided to express his desire at the meeting. There was nothing left for me to do but to agree. The time of departure of the first group was approaching, to the place of forcing arrived units. Commanders in a low voice began to give the last instructions. We approached the formation. In the group went away mostly shelled fighters. Many of them had orders and medals on their uniforms, patches for wounds. They knew a lot about attack and defense, experienced the weight of the pressure of superior enemy forces, were able to find a way out where there seemed to be no way out at all. That's why they accepted what was happening, at least outwardly, without unnecessary emotion. I looked at the calm faces and almost physically felt warmth and tenderness for all these people. They realize what they are doing, but they do not give away their feelings. Lieutenant Yeligin is the first in the ranks, and Ivan Ivanovich forcing of Desna, Soch, Dnieper, Western Bug, battles for Bryansk, Onechta, Dubrava, on the right bank of Turia, in dozens of other known and unknown places. I hold out my hand. Yeligin shakes it firmly and in a slightly deaf voice says, See you later, Commander. Let's say goodbye, Ivan Ivanovich. A smile slid across Yeligin's face. Obviously my words touched him too. Just in case we say goodbye, Alexander Terentievich, we're not going to my mother-in-law for Panga. We hugged each other tightly. Next to Lieutenant Yeligin stretched out with a machine gun Sergeant Zartoy. Nedot, you regret that you volunteered to be in the first group? No, Comrade Captain, I didn't regret it. I think so here. The first to the last is the same. It's even easier for us, the Krauts aren't waiting. But when the Germans wake up, then we'll have to hold on. And it's not in my character to wait and languish. The sergeant stepped from foot to foot, glanced at Private Presov, who was standing next to him, and elbowed him. That's right, Vasil, and immediately turned to me. Don't worry about us, Comrade Captain. We won't let you down. Many questions. What questions can there be? Sergeant Zatoksny raised his machine gun. We have food for it. The petty officer gave us a dry ration, but we wouldn't refuse a refill. The soldiers laughed. Lieutenant Alexander Chikishev shook his head. What a greedy one you are, Sergeant. I am frugal, Comrade Lieutenant. My father taught me from childhood, if you leave for a day, stock up for two. That's our peasant spirit, not from ourselves, but to ourselves. I approached Chikshev. Fyodor Nikolaevich, I wish you success. I hope for you, fellow countrymen. Chikshev was a native of the Omsk region. He grew up and was brought up in a small village Nankovo. From his father and mother he inherited natural strength and smartness, and the harsh land has developed his endurance. Parsimonious on words, Alexander Nikolaevich passed the steep passes of war before becoming an officer, and I was especially pleased that the lieutenant expressed his desire to go in the first group. Next to him stood Junior Sergeants Ivan Lunev and Vasily Bogomazov, Swadovsk's Private Vladimir Ovsyannikov, other soldiers, not once baptized by fire, tested in large and small battles. I was confident in each of them and could rely on each of them as on myself, but I could not look at their faces, say a word, shake their hands. People were leaving for a dangerous job, and who knows whether we will see each other again. I understood it well, and so did they. That's why the faces of the fighters were a little more stern than usual. Meanwhile, the time was passing. The rain that had been drizzling earlier turned into a large, fierce rain, as it is in the middle of summer. At that time, Major Kolyabin appeared on the shore. Nikolai Afanasievich was as usual cheerful. Had you received nothing from Blokin? He asked me. No, but we are waiting any minute. For some time we stand holding our breath, but except for the sound of rain and the splash of playing fish, nothing is heard. The western bank of the river seems to be frozen, lurking in the impenetrable darkness. Nerves are strained to the limit, and suddenly there was an instantaneous noise near the shore. I flipped. Sound in pike hesitant fish, snatched muffled Kuliaben. Its appetite at any time of day is wolfish. Finally, in the darkness of the opposite shore, a light appeared 3 times and then went out. A signal from Blokin, reported the observer. The enemy in the first trench is not detected. A couple of minutes later the signal was repeated. Well, Alexander Terentyevich, let's begin. You, said Kolyabin, and a little quieter added. I do not know who in others, but in our Bryansk-Red banner you are the first to start forcing. Remember, a lot depends on your success. Not only regiments of the division, but also our neighbours will follow the road you have trodden tomorrow. I gave a command to Lieutenant Yelajev. Yes, set sail. Let's move off. Ivan Ivanovich ordered. In the silence that ensued, we could hear the blades of the oars crashing into the water. The first boat moved away from the shore. Following it as quietly departed, and the second, led by Lieutenant Alexander Chikishev. The third boat was commanded by the secretary of the party organization of the battalion, Lieutenant Vasily Maligin. Then the fourth, fifth. For some time we silently looked after silhouettes disappearing in the night. Major Kuliabin was the first to break the prolonged pause. It's a long way off, Alexander Terentyevich. I think so. I said thoughtfully. The beginning, in my opinion, not bad. If the commander says that the beginning is not bad, then so it is. I think let's not waste time. Who's in your second group? Senior Lieutenant Chuganov's company and machine gunners with battalion headquarters. I'm taking with me the commander of the mortar company, Lieutenant Ponomarev, with the control cell. Good, but will you fit on the boats? We have rafts prepared just in case. Otherwise we won't make it in time. It'll start to get light. We went to the machine gunners. Barsayuk. I recognize the officer. Yes, comrade captain, I am. The lieutenant put his hand to the headdress, wanted to report, but Major Kulyabin stopped him. Don't, Lieutenant. How is the mood of the men? Fighting, comrade major. We're going for such a job. What else can it be? Just hurry up. There's not much time left, Vasily Fedotovich. In about 40 or 50 minutes, if everything goes well in the first group, we'll be on our way too. They seem to be in order so far. The lieutenant nodded towards the opposite bank of the Vistula. They are silent. It's hard to say what they have there. Only a campfire was visible. If there is a combat guard there, we should take it quietly. We moved on. Same, comrade captain. 40 minutes later, a messenger grew up in front of me. The boats have returned. The loading is done. I turned to Major Kulyaev. I have to go, comrade major. What, the boats are back? Yes. The second echelon has finished loading. Everything is going according to plan, Kolyabin said slowly. I wish you success, Alexander Terentyevich. I'll follow you. Thank you. I'm waiting. In about 3 minutes, I was sitting in the boat. Captain Bukharin pushed the boat away from the shore. The soldiers swung the oars, and we moved to the middle of the river. Under the raindrops, the water bubbled overboard. We could hear the neighbouring boats splitting it, and from time to time the greenish light of a pocket flashlight flashed from the slowly lapping opposite shore. There they were waiting for us. At last we docked, jumped down on the sand. A signalman recognized me, ran up and reported. Comrade Captain. The group headed by Lieutenant Yelagin went towards the campfire. How long have they been gone? As soon as we landed. By time we should approach the Germans. The last words of the soldier were drowned out by the crackle of machine gun bursts. The rumble of gunshots passed over us, echoed in the floodplain of the Vistula, and again the silence closed over us. The rain was still pounding on the leaves of the shrubbery. My feet were stuck in the wet coastal sand. I wiped my instantly sweating forehead with the palm of my hand. No way, we've run into a combat guard, Captain Presnyakov says. Machine gun bursts again cut through the rainy darkness, followed by grenade explosions. It's a pity, but there's nothing to be done. They found themselves. Now we must be quick to impose their will on the enemy. This is now the key to success. I turn to the adjutant to the battalion chief. Igor Tarasovich, take the men, and to help Yelagin. Do not let any German to leave through the old river. Force it. While the Krauts will sort out what's what, we need to seize a bridgehead. Captain Presnyakov ran to fulfill the order. Shooting at the side of the enemy's combat outpost was growing. From Lesny Kalupa in our direction stretched zigzag missiles. The enemy was trying to get a grasp of what was happening on the other. However, little could be made out behind the shroud of rain. Meanwhile, the boats continued to dock. From one of them jumped out on the sand Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Chugunov. "Faster, guys, faster," heard the hoarse bass of the officer. Shouted him. Nikolai Pavlovich ran up. Meresenyakov led the group. I showed my hand in the direction of the battle. Catch up with him. I'll take care of it myself. How many men are left on the other side of the river? 30 platoon. Chugunov, apparently realizing the vagueness of his answer, added, "As soon as they arrive, I will immediately send them to you. The task on the spot will clarify Presnyakov." Soldiers of the 6th Company together with the commander disappeared in the night darkness. Almost immediately a raft came to the shore. "Nurse, to me, comrades." "You, comrade captain." Senior Lieutenant Serpukin recognized me by my voice. Water was dripping down from his pants and overalls. "Did you roll over?" "No, we did not calculate the load," explained Pyotr Fedorovich. "We had to take a swim, but everyone made it, comrade captain." While I was giving the platoon commander a task, other boats bumped their bows into the sand. From the water's edge came the chatter of Lieutenant Pyotr Oshev, the commander of the platoon of anti-tank guns. "Ammunition, ammunition, don't drown." Soon machine gunners appeared. Here the units did not linger. They unloaded and left in the previously planned direction. Leaving Captain Bukharin on the shore, I hurried to Presnyakov. The firing, having moved somewhat to the right, was quieting down. 3 human figures suddenly appeared before us. In front was a machine gunner, followed by a prisoner with his hands tied behind him, and 4 steps behind him was another of our fighters. Having equaled me, the machine gunner slowed down. "No, comrade captain, the Kraut has been taken." The junior lieutenant ordered to bring him to the headquarters. It turns out that a group of fighters led by Volkov, bypassing the enemy's guard, came to the reed-free bank of the old river, and then they came face to face with a German. In spite of the rain, the Hitlerovite had laid out soap and toothpaste on a coastal boulder, and, naked from the waist down, was brushing his teeth. In short, in his misfortune, the rest was a matter of technique. Now the men, following the platoon commander's orders, escorted the prisoner. So the Kraut appeared before me, in only pants, with a towel around his neck and with complete bewilderment on his face. I decided to interrogate him immediately. "From what regiment? What forces are defending Lesny Kalupi?" The fascist began to speak long and confusedly, repeating the words Hitler Katut. There was no interpreter. One of the escorts helped him. 453rd Infantry Regiment, 253rd Infantry Division, comrade captain. Here's his soldier's book. "Lead on." I waved my hand, let Bukharin take the capital to the regimental headquarters, and I hurried to the place of the hushed fight. In 20 meters I met the wounded. A fighter of small stature, soiled with mud, with a bandaged hand, supported a head taller than his comrade. The orderly stopped. "No. What is it, boys?" "The Kraus Strapalier." "What do you mean?" I burst out. "Who survived, comrade captain?" The black-haired fighter recognized me. They ran through the reeds. You can't keep up with them. What a shame. But there was nothing to be done. The Germans were disturbed. Machine guns rang from the direction of Lesny Kalup. Soon they were joined by the sound of machine guns. Not far from us fell several flares. Fire flashed in the shrubbery, dimly illuminating the leaves glistening from the rain, the wet faces of the soldiers. From the west came a muffled murmur, and almost immediately we heard the whistle of shells falling. We involuntarily ducked. The shells exploded to our right. Shrapnel flew over our heads with a shriek. The second volley hit a little to the left and farther away. It was easy to guess from the explosions. The batteries of 105mm caliber were firing. The fascists had not yet found us, but they were already worried. Experience suggested that we were about to be detected. It is worth to get in the field of vision of German observers, as enemy artillerymen will concentrate fire in the necessary square. The professional skill of German artillerymen can be envied. Throw, I shouted to the orderly and the accompanying machine gunners. We were up for a throw, but then two fighters ran out into the clearing. Who are they? Comrade Captain. My panting sergeant ran up. Captain Presniakov passed on. The first group forced the river. I see, Comrade Sergeant. Escort me to Presniakov. Yes, sir. I looked for machine gunners with my eyes. Closest to the others was the squad commander. Junior Sergeant, take one of your subordinates to Captain Bukharin. Tell him, immediately direct those who have arrived to the old river, not wait until all of them have crossed. The junior sergeant rushed to carry out orders, and we moved straight across the floodplain meadow. The rain began to subside quickly, but the tall grass whipped at our feet, showering us with a cloud of spray. Our wet uniforms clung to our bodies, our skin stinging. The air was viscous, somehow dense. The rockets and fires from the flares flickered dimmer and dimmer. At first I did not understand what was going on, but when we reached the bank of the old river, I saw that after us, from the side of the Vistula River, the fog was quickly creeping in. Machine gun here, give me the machine gun. Magalty came to me a muffled voice. My comrade captain, called the sergeant in charge. Adjutant of the senior battalion here? I went around a sprawling willow bush. A group of machine gunners were crossing the river. Loaded with ammunition, holding machine guns in their hands, the soldiers waded through the reeds and then waist-deep in water moved to the other side. Captain Presniakov instructed the platoon commander. Basyuk from Shugunov, do not break away. Keep with him elbow communication. I'll cross next. I'll only wait for a contact from the commander. Why wait for him? Igor Tarasovich, I'm here. Presniakov, stepping towards me, wanted to say something but didn't have time. I heard a growing squeal, then a deafening blow, and the squeal as if choked in the swamp sludge. A shell exploded literally 3 steps away from us. The fragments had long since scattered, and we fell into the mud and lay there, unable to get off the ground. When we finally jumped up, we had to scrub off the liquid mud mixed with tina, but the swampy smell managed to cling to the wet uniform and pants. Oh shit, Presniakov was spitting up next to him. I got the stuff in my mouth. Might have probably a stray. There, it seems that the Krauts haven't detected us yet. After a short pause, Igor Tarasovich continued. Almost played in the box. Some of us are lucky. Perhaps I sighed with relief and turned the conversation to something else. So you say Chugunov crossed the old river? Just now. Machine gunners are crossing. That's not bad. Archiv and Kovalev's company will be here soon. The mortars are the last to cross. They would be further on, but we'll see how things work out. The conversation was interrupted by the clatter of a large caliber machine gun from the left flank. A twin German cannon wailed hastily, as if someone was hammering nails in with a heavy hammer. From the Dorotka side? Yes, from there, Alexander Terentievich, answered the adjutant senior. That's not enough. Who could disturb the Krauts there? Regimental scouts, said Presniakov guessed. They bent there. The cannon and machine guns kept beating and beating, scattering a fan of bullets and shells across the front and into the depths. The rifle and machine gun fire was gaining strength from the direction of the forest tulips, but so far it was aimless. The fascists were shooting, most likely to clear their conscience. The enemy, of course, already knew that we had landed. The surviving soldiers from the combat escort undoubtedly reported about it, but the fact that we had advanced so far, the Nazis hardly imagined. The report from Lieutenant Ilagin arrived. He is in the first trench. Well done, Deputy Commander. Opens the way to further actions. After all, from the trench occupied by him is not so far to the cliff. Bring the men to him, Igor Tarasovich. Nashas Satu to him, questioned Presniakov. To the cliff. Mate, Alexander Terentayevich, let me go there too. I'll have a look around, pull up the men. That's what I wanted to offer you. Presnyakov turned to the communicators with telephone reels of cable over their shoulder. Follow me. Presnyakov with a group of management and security of the battalion headquarters hid in the reeds. Behind them, 50 meters away, they heard the squishing of the swamp under the feet of the men and the muffled voice of a command. A new group was coming. The fog was rising higher and higher. It was damp and slippery, unpleasantly cold for a body in wet clothes. But I don't think I've ever been so glad of a dense, whitish shroud as I was now. This milk would help us stealthily over the precipice that alarmed me most. Waiting for the approach of the 5th Company and a platoon of anti-tank rifles, for which the machine gunners were sent, I stood on the bank of the old river. The Nazis continued to pound blindly on the island with machine gun bursts, launching rockets. Only if the boys had not discovered themselves before the time. I thought of Yelagin and Maligin. Then my thoughts turned to Kovalev and Oshev. What are they doing there? Can't they be quicker? I was distracted from these thoughts for a while by the approaching rustle of mines. A few seconds later, somewhere behind me, closer to the river, explosions rumbled. At that time, as if from under the ground, rose the commander of the 5th Company. You, Kovalev? Yes, comrade captain. I'm with the company. And Oshev? Nasainus with me. Bring him here. Lieutenant Oshev to the battalion commander. Muffled voices were heard. Oshev, off the battalion, I heard. Have you seen Captain Bukharin? I have. You said Kovalev. He wanted to come here with us, but the regimental company of anti-tank guns unloaded. He did. And the artillerymen? They are still on the other side of the Vistula. They tried to cross, but the enemy covered them with fire. 2 guns went down. Our mortars are luckier. They all made it across. Good. Take your men across the river and to the cliff. Lieutenant Ponomarev, commander of the mortar company, arrived. Mesely Dmitrievich, where did you find a firing position for the company? Yes, while they started to entrench nearby. Of course, the great temptation was when moving to have mortars at hand. But then, and it's natural, they will link our actions. And the main thing, what to do with ammunition. We can take a couple of trays per mortar, but not more. And for the battle it will be enough for 20 minutes, half an hour at most. I'll be with you, comrade captain, who continued Ponomarev. I'll establish a connection with the firing line. I looked at my watch. Soon it will begin to dawn. Good, so act like that. Lieutenant Ponomarev sent a liaison to the company with an order to accelerate the equipment of firing position. While I was talking to Ponomarev, Oshev came up, out of breath, apparently running. Without wasting time, we moved through the reeds. In the fog that enveloped us, we safely crossed the old river, crossed the trench, and in half an hour we were at the bottom of the... We came out successfully. Just in front of us, grabbing the protruding bushes and ledges, the soldiers were climbing up the slope. At the bottom I found neither soldiers from Yelagin's group, nor the deputy. There was no longer Presnyakov and his men. Some clods of earth sprinkled, and literally at my feet a fighter rolled down from above. It turned out to be a liaison from Yelagin. Yelagin was on the cliff and reported that it was foggy up there, and there were German infantrymen in the trenches, and that the fire was coming from the machine guns on duty and from the bunker on the outskirts of Dorotka. In the DZU several machine guns, including large caliber. Yelagin also reported that upstairs is the 6th Company and machine gunners. Natam Red Captain. Again found me with the eyes of a soldier. Lieutenant Yelagin asks if we can move forward. No, tell Yelagin, on the general signal. The deputy commander is not lost. I thought warmly of Yelagin. There was nothing more to do below, and we climbed to the crest of the cliff. Now it did not require much labor to see the stubble lying ahead, the sheaves stacked in an unusual way for us. Although under the night sky in the foggy haze, everything took somewhat different forms, lost the clarity and sharpness of outlines. The enemy's trenches, those that were closer to us, could still be seen, but the distant ones were only guessed. Arcs of fire appeared and disappeared over the field. These were the German machine guns firing. I stood for a while, taking in the situation. The forest hail-ups were now ahead of us and to our right. On the left flank was Dorotka. This was confirmed by the traces of machine gun bursts. Started giving orders. 2 platoons of machine gun company attached to the companies to ensure the flanks. Regimental group of scouts petty officer Blokin moved to the right flank. The scouts were given the task to visit Lesny Kalopy, and if possible to determine what surprises Hitlerites could present us from this side. All this time Lieutenant Ashev was trying to get in my sight. He was eager to get a command to participate in the general attack. However, I had to disappoint him. Who knows how events would unfold? And no matter how they unfolded, the Nazis will certainly try to do everything to throw us into the Vistula. That's when the anti-tank gun platoon will have a job. Wait a minute, Pyotr Pavlovich. Stay in my reserve, your fighters will have something to do. But the stubborn steppe man was still stomping around me, sighing heavily. That night nature worked for us. The fog that overlapped the edge of the cliff masked our preparations. In the viscous, opaque air, the sounds caused by the careless actions of the men preparing for battle were deafening. Time was running fast. Companies and platoons took their places. Liaisons arrived from the commanders. Captain Presniakov appeared, reported on the readiness of companies to attack. It's time, Igor or Tarasovich. Presniakov nodded in agreement. We pulled out rocket launchers and almost simultaneously pulled the triggers. Red and green lights flashed in the sky, and the sound of the shots was drowned in the bursts of enemy machine guns. Unit commanders raised their men to the attack. We could not see the general chain of the battalion, but as the cells of the company's directorates moved forward, we noticed. Let's go. Presniakov's voice gave away his excitement. Is that all? As if in response to his words, we heard firing across the entire width of the front of our attack. Fascist machine guns struck the battalion's combat order, and a minute later the enemy's artillery and mortar batteries gave their voices. The battle began to gain strength. I was worried about the thought. Would the companies be able to run to the second trench of the Nazis? Then we had the advantage that the enemy artillery, afraid of catching our own, would stop firing. Unfortunately, the worst happened. Approximately in the middle of the field, the soldiers had to lie down under the devastating fire. Company commanders asked for fire support. However, except for reinforcing the fire of our mortar company, could not help them in any way. The enemy defense turned out to be quite saturated with firepower. From the regiment commander arrived a liaison. Major Pavyuk was on the island with a group of scouts and machine gunners. I was pleased with the news. I sent Valentin Yevstafievich a report on the result of forcing. While the communicators were pulling the cable from the NP to the companies, I went to Kovalev's company. It was difficult to make a complete picture of the battle that ended. The shroud of fog covering the ground hid stubble, sheaves scattered by explosions. In place of funnels, the fog seemed darker. Dark hillocks stood out in the bodies of the dead. I got a good look at only one German officer. Perhaps it was because I almost stepped on him while walking around the fallen sheaves. With his pistol clutched in his hand, he was curled up by the trench, blood still oozing from his laceration. Naikov's work. Kovalev nodded toward the dead man. Lyak was running ahead of me. A German machine gun would hit him from over there. Kovalev pointed along the trench. I hear someone of ours fell down with a groan. I mowed him down. You boy! Lyak grabbed a grenade from his belt. Here I overtook him. I can see the way of communication. A trench. Fritz from a gun aims at me. I want to stop, but I can't. I'm running by inertia. This is your end, Ivar, I thought. But someone fell on the German and put a bayonet between his shoulder blades. I look and can't believe my eyes. Lyak again. I want to present him for the award both for the machine gun and for saving the commander. I obey. Present him. Our fighters among the dead, even despite the artillery and mortar fire, were few. This contributed to the fact that the company was able to maintain surprise in the attack. Although the Germans had forced us to lie down, we were now feeling insecure. This was evident from the unnecessary nervousness with which they opened rifle and machine gun and artillery fire several times during the first hour. This haphazard fire was the price for fear, for giving us a chance to cling to the bank of the Vistula. Realizing that the enemy was about to descend on us, we prepared for defense. Machine and hand machine guns, anti-tank guns were placed in such a way that they would cover each other with fire as much as possible. Finally, there was a case for the impatient commander of the platoon of anti-tank guns. Most of the tank fighters had to be moved to the tank-dangerous direction, the road coming from Lesny Kalupa. This information about the possibility of tanks came from Blokin's scouts who returned from Lesny Kalup. Here regimental sappers of Tushenikov put mines. Pre-prepared non-staff sapper departments of the companies came in handy. Fighters prepared the main and reserve firing positions. Liaison officers with a group of soldiers dug a shelter under the battalion observation post. We were in a hurry. As long as the fog held, it saved us. The Germans, apparently not having understood the situation, continued to take out their anger on the coastal reeds. So it went on till 4 o'clock. It was beginning to dawn. A liaison came running. "Merchant comrade, Captain, the Germans are accumulating on the eastern outskirts of Lesny-Kalop. At that time, from the enemy side came the sound of gun salvos. The shells that flew over us tore up the ground somewhere under the cliff. The second volley came closer. The third one covered a section of the trench. Did anyone get hit or not? The explosion of the shell tore the cable, damaged the equipment. And how necessary now was communication with the companies. The liaison officers were fiddling with the apparatus, but they had no luck so far. Sighted, impatient and anxious. Finally, someone shouted joyfully, "There's a connection. I was connected to cover." "Ah, you." "So far, so good. I'm waiting for guests. They're about to arrive. I'll meet them properly. Let them come closer. Don't reveal yourself beforehand. You understand me?" "Yes, I understand. Let them in and destroy them with dagger fire. Warn the neighbors too, especially the machine gunners. There's no communication with them or with Chugunov yet." "I'll warn them now." "Come on, Ivan Arkhippovich." But no matter how much they expected the enemy, he still appeared suddenly. In the greying air outlined a dense chain. The soldiers were even confused at the first moment. The enemy was so close, but they remembered the order firmly. They did not open fire without a general command. The Germans came closer. Then long bursts of machine guns and automatic rifles, rifle fire splashed. Brisk aimed fire cut the German chain to pieces, but did not stop it. The Nazis continued to run towards the downpour of bullets, looping, falling, as if they ran into invisible obstacles. And only in front of the trench they began to turn and retreat, but few managed to get away. Only the wounded managed to crawl away under the cover of the fog. Lieutenant Yeligin came up. "A start has been made, Alexander Terentevich. And not a bad one, in my opinion." "Much better." Ivan Ivanovich nodded in the direction from where the German chain had appeared before. The fog was dissipating, and through the thinning whitish veil the dark spots became clearer and clearer. They dotted the ground in front of the 5th Company, where the spearhead of the enemy counterattack was aimed. Gradually the spots took the shape of human figures. They put them in order. Ivan Ivanovich sighed. Yeligin loved life and hated death with all his heart, as only a healthy and good man can hate it. "There we are," said someone's voice. We looked back. Major Kurlyabin and the commander of the communications company, Senior Lieutenant Landakov, were rushing towards us. Next to him ran with coils behind his shoulders Sergeant, and a little to the left, 2 more soldiers. "Where from, Mikhail Grigorievich?" I asked Landakov. "All of us from there, Comrade Captain," mercilessly answered Lyjaka. "Now already from the left bank. Major Modin says, 'Do not return until there is no wire communication. I'll tune in with the regiment commander.'" Major Pavliuk with scouts, Sapper platoon and company Apsi regiment after the crossing moved to the foot of the cliff. Landakov turned to SQ. Nizabito set the apparatus combat. It turned out that Landakov established a connection with the regiment commander and directly from him came to us. "No, is Pavliuk there?" I could not resist the question. "Normal," smiled even more Landakov. "The rest of the battalions are about to arrive. You've made a mess here, that's right. I can only hear on the phones. I'll tune in, I'll tune in, I'll tune in, I'll tune in. The division corps, army is in. The chief of staff doesn't know how to fend off the calls. At night they reported. The bridgehead has been captured. But what's next? Have they advanced or withdrawn? We can't see. No communication. Our superiors are in a hurry." Comrade Captain." Miss Sergeant Dijon interrupted our conversation. "There's a phone call for you." 2. An unfamiliar girl's voice. "Demands you personally." I picked up the phone. "Yes. I'll tune in." "You'll be talking to the first." "I'll tune in," asked a distant, deaf voice. "Yes, I'm listening to you." "This is Donskov. Where are you?" "Behind Sinenka." "Say it again." "Behind Sinenka." "I shall see. How long?" "Nay, since last night." "Thank you, Captain. Hang in there. It's got to be hot today. Hang in there. Whatever it takes, I'll tune in." We'll do everything here to support you." The corps commander was silent and continued warmly. "Well done. Tell the men my thanks. If you hold out now, you'll be heroes. I believe in you and your guys. Tell the people so. I hope for you, Bryansk people. You made me happy today. See you at the Sinen." Semyon Ivanovich hung up the phone, but almost immediately the voice of the regiment commander sounded in the phone. "I heard all tune in your conversation. Do you realize what importance they attach to us? How's it going?" "We're putting ourselves in order, fixing ourselves up. How long before the promised arrival?" "I meant the anti-tank batteries and artillery division attached to the battalion." "So far behind Sinenka," we answered the major. "It is difficult to deliver. Some of your boats went down, promised to drop off sappers. They're not here yet. We'll have to make do with cash forces." Sheriff Avliuk's voice disappeared in the rumble of shell bursts. The Germans began a new bombardment. With every minute it intensified. 81 EM batteries joined the artillery preparation, then heavy 6-barrel mortars rumbled. Overhead, droning sounds floated over the bridgehead. The ground shook finely, taking in the red-hot metal. Kulyabin, together with the battalion, passed all the circles of hell. The ground was collapsing before his eyes, flowing like water down the walls of the trenches. The soldiers were tortured, throwing the earth out of the cells of the observation post. Major Kulyabin encouraged me. Nothing, combat, we'll survive. We are 2 willed men, and it's too early for us to die. We haven't done much yet. Keep in touch with the companies. A large shell fragment crashed at our feet and hissed in a puddle of rainwater. Lieutenant Yeligin stepped on it, pressed it into the mud, looked at me. "Alexander Terentievich, I'm here to see Chugyonov. Be careful not to get caught. Maybe you'll wait it out?" "What's to be will be. The fog has thinned out. It'll be harder to get there afterwards. The Germans have broken their teeth on Kovalev. Now they'll probably go for the 6th Company." "Well, go on then. Take a machine gunner with you just in case." I nodded to a nearby soldier from the headquarters guard. Ducking, Ivan Ivanovich together with a soldier ran to the flank of the battalion defence, but not far from us fell, as if drowned in the last rags of fog, and immediately behind them splashed the flames of the rupture. The shrapnel whistled above us with a screech. I threw an anxious glance at the place where the deputy commander and the soldier were lying down, waited until they got up, and only then turned to Landakov standing next to me. "Well, Mikhail Grigorievich, now you will see where we have reached and what we do. I guess you got used to it in the regiment headquarters." He nodded at the approaching whistle of shells. "Or are you going back to Modin?" "No way, I'm not used to it. I often have to be on the front line. I'm not thinking of going back yet. I hope I won't be unnecessary for you." "Of course not. We'll be glad to have you." The telephone rang. The companies were reporting about the enemy advance. Almost immediately we heard the roar of engines. "Nay, tanks. Listen to the rumble, Presniakov. The Krauts decided to take us seriously." "It looks like they are. Serious or not, but I think that the enemy has not played games before." Presniakov looked at me with surprise. Realizing that he said the wrong thing, embarrassed, but did not make excuses, went to a hastily made table, on which lay a map of the battalion defence area drawn in pencil. Fascist shells and mines continued to burst, overlapping throughout the depth of the captured area. Among the soldiers were killed and wounded, especially those who were caught in the open by the shelling. In the companies, several machine guns and anti-tank guns were out of order. The radio station of the communicators was broken. The artillery preparation ended with a massive volley of howitzers and heavy mortars. In the ensuing silence, the rumble of engines was now more and more clearly heard. "It's time for me to go to the people." Mitch turned to me, Kulyabin. "I'll be at the machine gunners." Nikolai Afanasievich resolutely stepped toward the message. I nodded to the machine gunners, and they hurried after Kulyabin. I brought binoculars to my eyes. The optics sharply reduced the distance. The forest haylofts no longer seemed like a general clutter of buildings. In the lens, sharply marked buildings. Many houses had peak-tiled roofs. Next to thatch-roofed huts and barns in black sweat, they seemed beautiful. I moved my lenses closer, hoping to see tanks, but there were none. There were only infantry. That surprised me a little. Again, I shifted my gaze to the eastern outskirts of the settlement, and then I saw a self-propelled vehicle crawling out from behind a barn where the road made a sharp turn. The blunt barrel of the second gun appeared almost next to it. "That's it," flashed in my mind. So self-propelled vehicles. And then I thought, the horseradish is not sweeter than the radish. If the Germans have prepared positions for them in advance, they will show us where the crayfish are. My fear was justified. Ferdinand's took up firing positions and opened fire on our front line. The shells unfolded machine gun platforms, firing cells, demolished the earthen berms. I looked at Lieutenant Ponomarev. It is unlikely that mortars could help anything, but then intervened our regimental artillery battery, which had time to take a position on the left bank of the Vistula. Shells noisily flew over us and began to burst in front of the self-propelled vehicles. The cannoneers were firing at extreme range, so our guns were not doing much damage to the enemy. When a shell hit one of the self-propelled guns and the explosion of its own ammunition blew it apart, the Ferdinands stopped firing for a while. Meanwhile, the fascist infantry came closer and closer to our front line. This time the Germans clearly aimed at the center of our defense. They drew here machine gunners and machine gun crews. I tried to understand the enemy's plan. A hunch came. At the junction of the companies is a small height with gentle slopes. The high rise dominates the surrounding terrain. From it well shot most of the battalion's defences. To seize it means not only to split the companies, but also to get the opportunity to control our rear. And it became clear. The Germans finally understood the situation. No wonder they are aiming here. Connecting with Shuganov warned him. I've already taken measures, Comrade Captain. The Krauts can't see the heights. What measures? From the German side, the heights are sloping down into the gully. Apparently they want to distract us on the flanks and get to this ravine. We'll concentrate fire on the flanks and drive them all here if possible, forcing them to come out on the tongue. We'll meet them here. Company machine gunners on the right side and machine gunners on the left. The plan was simple and, in my opinion, ensured the fulfillment of the combat task. I promised Shuganov to help mortar fire. Lieutenant Ponomarev had time to shoot. But, as often happens in battle, the situation suddenly changed dramatically. From the height located northeast of Lesny Kalop and labelled on maps and schemes 131.4, supported by 2 tanks, appeared Nazi machine gunners. The enemy began to stream around the right flank of Kovalev's company. Will not be confused, Ivan Arkhippovich. A thought flashed. Still will begin to remove from the left flank of the forces. The fascists are just waiting for that. I asked the signalman to connect me with him. The platoon commander answered the phone. Where's the company commander? In the trench. Nicey. Tell him not to expose the left flank. We'll help with the fire now, and don't let him scurry around the defences like a cockroach. He's got binoculars. Something crackled in the tube, and it got quiet. In vain I kept calling. Hello, hello. The telephonists, picking up the spare machine and reel, ran to the... I turned to Ponomarev. Nachimsi, can you cover the Krauts? Of course I can. Then go ahead, do it. On the infantry. Charge. Fire on the fugitives. Are you going to shoot at once? Ponomarev looked at me in surprise. Vasily Dmitrievich, I started the war with a mortar company. I learned some basics, although I commanded a little. See, a faint smile touched his weathered lips. The mortar company commander said with confidence in his voice, Laboratory small, I'll cover. Well, look. Almost simultaneously, we raised binoculars to our eyes. The salvo dissolved in the rumble of battle, but the ruptures were clearly visible. A series of mines lay between the first and second waves of Hitlerites. Ponomarev made corrections. The second salvo accurately covered the Nazi chain. Yeah, bitches, give. Captain Presniakov couldn't resist. Well done. They are snipers. We're doing our best. Modestly Vasily Dmitrievich, continuing to correct the fire. The Germans rushed forward, trying to get out from under the mortar fire, but again came under a barrage of bursts. Name tack them. One of the observers couldn't stand it. As if hearing this exclamation, the company machine guns and automatic rifles of the scouts hit the enemy. The front wave of the attackers could not withstand and lay down 150 meters from the bends of our trench. The second did the same. Machine gunners, snipers were now beating German infantrymen crawling away under the protection of Armour Ferdinand. Engrossed in the right flank, I for a while let out of sight of the events taking place in the centre. German infantry, as promised Shuganov, was in the crossfire of machine guns and handheld machine guns, but suffering losses. The Nazis persistently climbed forward. They were so confident of their success that even when they were left no more than a platoon, rushed to storm the height. That's when Sergeant Zatotnai's squad, entrenched on the heights, put the final cross on their plan to split our defences. The soldiers met the enemy with a dense fire. No sooner had the shots of this attack subsided than the enemy opened a new heavy artillery fire on the battalion's defence. The Junkers flew in, and we took the heaviest bombardment. Then the Germans again went on the attack, and so on throughout the day. Artillery attacks were replaced by air strikes, bombing, attacks, and again all over again. Water was boiling in the casings of Maxim machine gun barrels were red hot. Hold on! In what variants only we had not had a chance to hear this call on the first day of capturing the bridgehead. Halt! Repeated shooters, machine gunners, Peterovci, not a step back. Commanders ordered, we have no land beyond the Vistula, called the Communists. Everyone, from the soldier to the commander, lived by one thing: to withstand, to endure. At noon, the artillery division of Major Valentin Bereza came to the river. I knew the major well. He was a brave man, in love with artillery to the depths of his heart, a man of cheerful character. Ivan Makarenko, Ivan Kizelev, Ivan Boldenko were battery commanders to match Valentin Petrovich. 3 Ivans. There were different stories about them in the regiment and in the division with happy endings. Since the Ivans came, the Krauts have nothing to do. The joke took root, forming different stories and told tales from their front life. They, these modest guys, in response to questions only answered smiling. On Ivan and Peter all Russia is kept, and we, of them. In short, the fame of their skill, boldness, determination in the critical situation of battles went wide. We could see from our base how, having turned around, the artillerymen duelled with the German artillery, which was behind Lesnie Kalop, and drowned rafts with ammunition on the Vistula. But we could do nothing more. Other enemy batteries were out of range of our artillery fire. At 14 o'clock, communication with the right bank was restored. Through the crackle of ruptures, I heard Abashev's voice. The division, corps, and army congratulate on the capture of the bridgehead. Pass thanks to the soldiers and commanders. Hold on, I'll tune in at night. The Zub suddenly fell silent again. Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Landakov looked at me anxiously. August. Landakov gritted his teeth in his heart. The impulse be damned, Misha. What else can be, if we are unharmed? Landakov shifted his gaze to Sergeant Nikolai Dizhin, who was standing next to him, and they understood each other, grabbed a coil of cable, ran to the river, and immediately their way was blocked by machine gun fire. The line splashed almost at the very feet of the communicators. Both of them fell down. An unpleasant chill went over my heart. That's it, the end of the guys. But suddenly, Landakov and Dizhin jumped up, and in one fell swoop rolled into a No, you can't take us at once, Ma flashed in my head. Shalisha, Kraut, not for nothing we have travelled hundreds of kilometres. We have learned something. Having waited until the firing subsided, Landakov jerkily threw himself out of the funnel and just as quickly disappeared into another. After him the sergeant did the same. So, disappearing and reappearing, they approached the shore. One controlled the wire, the other dragged the coil. My heart is restless. During the last German counterattack, the ammunition was running low. We had half a magazine for a machine gun, a dozen or two for a machine gun, and a heel of cartridges left for a rifle. Grenades, 1 for every third man. My PPS has an empty disc and 7 rounds in the gun. Several men had already been sent for ammunition to the right bank of the Vistula. Some of them managed to get there. We could see rafts loaded with crates leaving the opposite bank, but at once German artillery concentrated fire on them, water columns soared, logs flew, people were killed, and the ammunition and grenades, which were so desperately needed, went to the bottom. The fascists had shot every square metre of the river surface. They had no shortage of ammunition and opened heavy fire even on individual soldiers trying to reach our shore, not to mention the rafts. The boats, as soon as the fog began to clear, were sunk. And now, in this difficult situation for us, the enemy was preparing for another attack, the 6th. We had to withstand it. With Bukharin, Presnyakov, Elagin, we puzzled over how best to repel the onslaught of the enemy. We thought this way and that way, but the issue was always bogged down in the lack of ammunition. What if we do this? We distribute ammunition equally, let the fascists get closer, hit them with a volley of TSE hand to hand. Nepal sends the backcast the way out. Bukharin supported me. Our strike will be a surprise for the Croats, and this is just what we need now. The idea is good, said Presnikov, leaning over the map. To die. So with music. You said it too, to die. Yelagin jumped up. There's no need to bury ourselves before the time. Our task is to survive, to hold the bridgehead. And you, to die with music. It's not a big deal. The regiment commander approved the decision. He put at my disposal his available reserve, a few men of machine gunners and scouts. With a heavy heart I went to the people. I understood by the past battles they were waiting for ammunition, replenishment, and here, but there was no other choice, no matter how bitterly I realize it. This is the case when you do not create circumstances, but they dictate their will to you. At the crossroads of a fresh, but already ploughed up by ruptures trench with communication lines, I saw a group of fighters. Positioned at the bottom of the shelter, they looked expectantly at the sergeant standing in a circle with a helmet in his hands. Savarin, I recognized the junior commander. I liked this medium-sized, thin, judicious, with an economic vein of a man. What's going on here, Stepan Ilyich? The sergeant turned around. A kind smile slid across his tired, greying face. We are dividing ammunition, comrade captain, so that then, as brothers, equally to everyone. Well, even that doesn't work. We're H-eyed Savarin. We've looked all over the place. It's bad. It's much worse. I came closer. The soldiers looked at me, waiting for an answer to the question about ammunition, which tormented each of us. But apparently my look was more eloquent than any words. Yes, comrade captain, we understand. A small soldier with a bandaged shoulder couldn't stand it. We see how the Krauts are beating on the Vistula, though they do not forget us. We are like a boil on a prominent place. They want to pick us off, but it hurts. That's why they're so furious. Their soul is in their liver. I want to, and it hurts. Yoy joked in response to his words' neighbour, and we are like that parent who does not command. Have you had lunch? I asked the fighters. We had a little snack, said the wounded man. We have plenty of dry rations. We'd like some cartridges, comrade captain. You're at it again, Savarin reprimanded his subordinate. He should understand. We'll wait until evening, then we'll get them. The company commander, said one of the soldiers. Senior Lieutenant Kovalev, accompanied by a machine gunner, was hurrying along the trench towards us. Apparently he had been warned of my arrival. As usual neat and tidy, he was shaved this time too. A white strip of cuff collar peeked out from under the collar of his uniform. He came up, put his hand to his helmet, began to report. No need, Ivan Archipovich. I stopped him. How's your mood? Normal, comrade captain. Kovalev took off his helmet, ruffled his hair, which was sticky with sweat and dust. We are beating the Germans. We're not thinking of going back. We didn't take the bridgehead to return it to the enemy. The losses are great. We're running out of ammunition. But that's all right. It's not the first time. We'll hope. Thank you for your frankness. That's why I've come to you. The Germans are building up for a new counterattack. I've decided to meet them with volley fire and hand-to-hand combat. I looked expectantly at Kovalev and only then noticed how shriveled for the last 24 hours. Ivan Archipovich. Yes, you are well twisted, I thought, looking at my I agree with you, and Kovalev interrupted my thoughts. Only it is desirable, comrade captain, more shouting and noise. Let them think that we came to us reinforcements. It will depend on you, Ivan Archipovich, as people will adjust. Now, comrades, Kovalev turned to the soldiers. Shout that not only the Krauts, the devils became sick. They won't follow us, we'll shout. Masavarin answered for all of them. Kavasov alone is worth it. His bass is like a deacon's. Now come on, comrade sergeant, you waved, a skinny fighter with a torn sleeve. What a screamer I am. Tell me too. The soldiers burst out laughing. All right, comrades, I still have to visit Chugunov. And you, Ivan Archipovich, gather the platoon commanders, familiarize them with our idea. Yes, sir. I've already thought of it myself, comrade captain. I found Senior Lieutenant Chugunov together with the platoon commanders in a big funnel. Or rather, it was no longer a funnel, but something like a dugout. The soldiers had given the torn edges a vertical shape, levelled and lined the bottom with grass, even managed to put some poles on top. Where did they get them from? In short, as we could in our conditions, we equipped the company commander's NP. Sergei Pavlovich gave instructions to the officers on refitting the positions of platoons, interaction in case of repulsion of the enemy counterattack. At my appearance, he stood up. The officers also stood up. Sit, comrades. Having lowered down on a trophy shell crate, I looked around the dwelling. Yes, you have settled down quite well, Nikolai Pavlovich. The Germans helped. One of the bombs hit here. The rest, as they say, is a matter of soldiers' ingenuity. The company commander was silent and looked at me questioningly. No ammunition yet, I said. You probably see how the Germans send rafts to the bottom. We have to make do with cash, though there's not much of it. The officers nodded understandingly. I explained them what to expect from the enemy in the near future. That the crowds for the last hour quieted down, they thoughtfully said Chugunov. I thought, what is this? Striped with all kinds of weapons and suddenly subsided. No other way, something is plotting. Just in case, I gathered the platoon commanders, warned them, and once again discussed the unresolved issue. Counterattack officers of the company liked it. It's understandable. We did not have too many chances to hold off the enemy, although we hoped for a favorable outcome. At our disposal, except for a fierce desire to win and soldiers' ingenuity, there was almost nothing else to hold the bridgehead. Then I looked in on the regimental scouts who were covering the battalion's flank. Platoon commander Pyotr Blokhin was giving his subordinates a task in case of repulsion of the enemy attack. The scouts looked brave. Behind their backs, German automatic rifles. From under their belts protruded enemy grenades with long handles, and from their boots, horns filled with cartridges. The picture was completed by belt pouches with short knife handles. What an arsenal! I shook my head. Where did you collect it? Where, comrade captain? Junior Sergeant Slepchenko was surprised at such an ineptitude. We borrowed it from the enemy. We beat the enemy, so to speak, with his own weapons. We are, comrade captain, smiled the petty officer. We have already put the krauts down. No, thank you. I rely on you as on myself. I took out cigarettes, gave them to the petty officer and the guys, took a puff of smoke and wondered, where are your weapons? In the dugout, Sepchenko said without blinking an eye. I ran out of cartridges in the PPS. I had to leave it and arm myself with this one for a while. The krauts were fleeing in the morning and left some machine guns with full ammunition. We saved them for a rainy day. When asked about the mood, Blokhin, smiling, replied, as always, excellent. And after a little hesitation he added, it would be faster, comrade captain, to break into Lesny Kalopy to expand the bridgehead. The fascist is brutalizing on our patch. We'll take Lesny Kalopy. In the meantime, I came to talk to you about repulsion of another attack. I told the scouts about the decision. I see, comrade captain. Me, said the petty officer. We are always ready to give the krauts a kick in the teeth. We are not used to sitting idly by, yet ready to repel the enemy. And on the general signal, dash forward. You'll get a specific task a little later. After talking to my comrades, I'm in a better mood myself. The question of whether we'd hold the bridgehead didn't even arise. On the contrary, people dreamed of expanding it. Recently, I again experienced the feeling of pride for my combat friends, reading the pages of the awarding orders extracted from the archives. Junior Sergeants Georgy Moskalev, Vladimir Slepchenko, Privates Mikhail Malkov, Ivan Mishin and others were awarded the Order of the Red Banner for forcing the Vistula. About 15 minutes after my return to the NP gathered company commanders. Since the officers knew the general situation well, I dwelled in more detail on the proposed direction of the enemy attack, possible variants of his strikes, our response reported signals. But then the Germans began shelling. With howling and rumbling, shells began to burst. The earth trembled, shook, sprinkled from the walls and broomsticks inside the trench. From the opposite bank our batteries answered. The first batch of guests to the fascists passed over our heads. To your places, comrades. Watch the signals. The raid lasted about 15 minutes. The fascists narrowed and then expanded the boundaries of shelling along the front and in depth. The last salvo came from 6-barrel mortars. However, even he did not bring us great losses. The personnel of the rifle company's mortarmen, Piterovsi, were hidden in the crevices. In the ensuing silence, the stifling odor of TNT hit my nose sharply. I looked out of the trench. The ground turned by explosions was smoking, the bushes mangled by mines and shells were smoking. Now they are coming, U.S. said nearby Captain Presnyakov. We have been watching the Germans here. Only for the last half an hour before the artillery attack we counted about 200 souls. It will be a serious matter. As if in confirmation of these words, a dense chain of krauts appeared from the shrubbery that grew a little higher than the road, followed by a second one. They were walking with rolled-up sleeves, shooting from automatic rifles, hand machine guns, rifles ahead of them. How dare! Presniakov couldn't stand it. Have you eaten Belena, you lunatics? Since the Germans are getting closer and closer. Through binoculars one can clearly see faces. Not young, tired, some impersonal grey, not those shiny faces, young and cocky, which I had seen in similar situations before. In the attack were people of older ages, obviously, from the last total mobilization. I cast a glance at the fighting order of the companies and noticed how in the collapsed, broken trenches and passages, shaking off the earth and dust, the traces of artillery and mortar raids. The soldiers are rising. Shugunov appeared in the gap of the trench, rushed to the remote machine gun cell and hid in it. But almost immediately his helmet was again in the field of view of binoculars. A second one soon loomed next to it. The soldier put the machine gun on the bumper and began to wipe the tape. I knew there were only 12.5 cartridges, no more. The soldier wrinkled his nose in displeasure. Shugunov said something concernedly, him pointing with his hand to the left, then to the right. Finally finished, clapped the machine gunner on the shoulder, and ran along the trench to the flank of the company. I turned the binoculars a little. In the lenses there appeared a motionless body sprawled behind the trench barrier. Who? A chill ran through his heart. An officer? Well, yes, him. A harness, a pistol on a wide belt, chrome boots, his left arm twisted unnaturally at his side, right arm stretched along his torso. Murdered, the thought burned. But suddenly he stirred, raised his head. Junior Lieutenant Karp Varivoda. Someone touched his shoulder. Isn't it time, Comrade Captain? Adjutant of the senior battalion said questioningly. It's early. When they reach the apple tree with the cut-off top, then we'll strike. The Nazis continued to approach, more and more tightly twisting the spring of nervous tension in each of us. A step, another. We could see how from behind the first German chain something shouted, pointing stack then in one direction, then in the other. Our companies were silent. But here the fascists crossed the line I had outlined. Pulling the trigger of the rocket launcher. With all the strength of my lungs, I shout, fire, Bukharin and Presniakov do the same. Rockets fly up. A short pause, and a friendly volley, followed by a second, third. The short machine gun bursts had not yet fallen silent, as dozens of voices throughout the battalion chain repeated in different tones. Attack, forward. By the corner of my eye, I had time to notice how the enemy chain trembled and began to disintegrate, as if some unknown force in one place or another snatches people out of it. However, the others continue to go forward, although the even line of the front chain has already broken. The Germans fell, huddled together in groups. As if tripped over something, staggered officer with a stack and stumbled to the ground and remained lying there. I shifted my gaze to the battalion's combat order. The soldiers are running towards the enemy. The excitement of the attack has seized everyone. I know what it's like. You rush towards the enemy, driven by a single desire to kill the enemy. There came the ever-increasing, familiar to every frontline soldier cry of hurrah. Captivated by common feelings, we stood up with the Chief of Staff. Meanwhile, the chain rolled up on the enemy like a sea wave, met him, slowed down and rolled over him, leaving behind squirming, wheezing figures. The companies chased the enemy. They crashed into the second wave of fascists. Hand-to-hand fighting began again. Running up to the place of the fight, I had time to notice how scouts were wielding butts and knives. Quick, agile, they fought in silence, as they were accustomed to act behind enemy lines. Shooters worked with shouting, strong expressions were heard. We hit the fascists with rifle butts, grenades, shovels. Whatever we could, whatever came to hand. In a matter of minutes we swung over the space that separated us from the bushes, where the enemy infantry was accumulating before the battle, and descended to the road, or rather, to the wide ploughed path in front of the village. And already the first houses of the forest hulops showed themselves, cut off from the shore. A thought suddenly burned my brain. Involuntarily I stopped running and shouted at the top of my lungs. Stop, get back, get back. As the commanders duplicated the command, but the men were still running by inertia. Machine guns rang out from the forest halops. Get down. Voices echoed throughout the chain. Get down. I fell down beside a young apple tree turned upside down. Nearby Presnyakov sprawled out and stared at me incomprehensibly. His lips snapped. Kalupai next door. Why are we lying here like on the naval, comrade captain? Igor Tarasovich, the Germans can cut us off from the Vistula. Then you'll have the Kalupas. We're already in the sack. You understand, in a sack, we have to retreat before the fascists sort it out. Get the men out. Give the signal. Up flew 2 red rockets. Companies, leaving fire cover, began to rush away. And just in time, the enemy's 6-barrel mortar batteries hit the bushes and trees just left above the road. Then the enemy tried to cut us off from the shore, but he was too late. The fighters had time to cross the field in front of the trenches and were now home. Riflemen occupied cells, machine gunners and anti-tank gun crews firing positions. Most had trophy automatic rifles and machine guns with horns and boxes of ammunition in addition to their own weapons. Here came in handy the study of the enemy's weapons. Now we will be able to repel another enemy attack, I noted to myself with satisfaction. 2 soldiers dragged a green trophy box past us. What are you carrying? Called them Presnyakov. Knee trophy grenades, comrade captain. Knee turned to the voice of a short soldier. Well done. I burst out. Where did you find them? It wasn't us. The company commander got it. Now we'll have something to meet the Krauts with. Well done, anyway.